Welcome to Meaningful Work Matters. I'm your host, Andrew Soren, and in this episode, I'm joined by Kathy Miller, a former senior manufacturing executive who spent decades leading massive plants and large-scale industrial operations before turning her attention to the science of human flourishing at work. Kathy has lived meaningful work from the concrete up. She's navigated intense performance pressure and learned firsthand what it means to deliver results without sacrificing people. In this episode, we explore how meaning shows up in operational environments, why dignity and high standards belong together, and what leaders can do to design systems where people feel seen, capable, and connected. We talk about leadership in places where the work is physical, the stakes are high, and the consequences of design decisions are felt immediately by the people who are doing the work. This is a conversation about what leaders choose to notice, to reinforce, and to protect when performance pressure is constant. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Meaningful Work Matters podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Soren, founder of Eudaimonic by Design. On this podcast, we'll dive into the world of meaningful work, explore its complexities, and examine its impact on people and the organizations they're a part of. Each episode features insightful conversations with cutting-edge experts who are successfully navigating the challenges of meaningful work. We hope to offer you ideas, frameworks, and tools to unlock potential and design work that's fulfilling, impactful, and supports everyone's well-being. Subscribe or follow us now, and let's make meaningful work matter. Kathy Miller, welcome to Meaningful Work Matters.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm so excited to be here.
For listeners, Kathy and I have known each other for quite a while. Not only was she a student in the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania, and we've known each other for years because of that, but also Kathy and I have had the opportunity to be part of a writing workshop together for many years. How many years has it been, Kathy?
3 or 4 at least.
So this is a
Yeah.
writers group that a woman named Catherine Britton spearheaded. I think we're actually entering into the last semester in which this writing group will happen in its current form. But Kathy and myself, along with CJ Pippin and Aaron Cohen, just to throw out some other names in this world, and of course Catherine Britton, have been in these groups together, watching each other, reading each other, listening to each other, providing feedback to one another as our various writing projects have evolved. And certainly for me, a lot of those writing projects over the last couple of years have been related to work that listeners of this podcast will be very familiar with, about meaningful work, about eudaimonia work. Much of that writing that I have done has been directly connected to those writers' workshops. And Kathy has been working on a few different book projects, but one that she's just published that I'm really excited to talk with her about today, called More is Better. So I'm gonna give her a chance to explain what that book is all about. But before I do, Kathy, I'm gonna give you the question that I always ask guests on this podcast. Tell us a little bit about what you think listeners need to know about you, and also what do you think makes your work meaningful?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity to explain myself. So the thing about me is I am a practitioner to the core. So I am a former senior executive in operations. I literally started my career at 17 years old as a co-op student in a vehicle assembly plant and worked my way up through 4 Fortune 500 companies to leading all the plants globally for Rolls-Royce. And so I spent a lot of time transforming operations, both performance and culturally. And that was recognized with a few things really special to me about being in the Women in Manufacturing Hall of Fame, as
Wow.
well as getting a Shingo Award. And the Shingo Award was done with a 1,500 UAW person plant. You know, some people think you can't really transform that in union environments, but that's 100% not true.
Hmm.
So when I was at Rolls-Royce, I was working with a coach, and she said, "What do you want to do next with your life?" And I said, "Well, am I not doing it? And she said, well, you've done this for, 3 years now here at Rolls Royce. Like, really, what do you want to do next? Do you want your boss's job? Do you want to, you know, run more plants? What do you want to do? And so I gave it some actual consideration over holiday break. And I realized that all of the things I was reading that gave me energy related back to positive psychology in the University of Pennsylvania. So I parted ways with Rolls Royce and applied to Penn and went back to school. And everybody thought I was, super crazy for doing that. But life changing experience for me. Finishing up my capstone, I said, I don't want to go back to corporate America. I want to work with a lot of companies. I want to help them through teaching them things I learned the hard way along the way. And as you know, you've read the book, there were some hard things that I went through, some fairly toxic environments that I was exposed to, and really help get this next generation ready by, getting business results without sacrificing the human being in the process. So, Kathy 2.0 is a board director, a coach, an author, a speaker, and I'm working with individuals and teams who want to get better business results through proven processes, sound leadership principles, and the science of human flourishing. So that's a little bit about me.
Pretty good answer. And I think definitely buried within that answer is lots of ways in which you think that your work is meaningful. But if you were to bottom line it in Kathy
Yeah.
2.0, what's the most meaningful part of this work?
For me now, it's, and it has been all along, is helping people see strengths that they didn't know they had in them, and then giving them the opportunity to meet challenges and grow with them.
Hmm.
And, that's when I work with which with coaches and individuals, but then helping the companies I work with create the systems around people and their strengths that really help them flourish. That's just so meaningful to me. I get such a rush out of days when people have those breakthrough moments, and people who used to frown when I walked into their plant are now smiling and looking up and making eye contact. Can't put a price tag on it. It's amazing.
It's true. Although I bet you could put a price tag on it. But,
I
that's
do.
just you. Yeah, of course, that's you. And it's one of the reasons I love you. So, okay, so let's talk about the book. So, more is better. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, the premise of it is really just I'm having so much fun with the acronym, right? More being about leading operations with meaning, optimism, and relationships for creating, accelerating, and sustaining excellence. So that's the MORE. And what it is, it's a practical field guide where I translate the work of brilliant organizational psychologists, organizational researchers into real talk and what it might look like actually, not only in places where people lead on carpet, but also lead on concrete.
So this is a phrase you've heard it here now for the first time in this podcast that I fell in love with, Kathy, when you first talked about it. Carpet versus concrete, and certainly most of the work that I have done in my life has been focused on the carpet, which is really the
Mhm.
blue collar intellectual workers who are using their brains mostly rather than people who are actually on the
Mhm.
floor on the concrete using their hands, getting dirty,
Mhm.
as it were. And you've really helped me think a lot more deeply about the differences between those two worlds. And specifically, I mean, the M of more stands for meaning. It's a big part of what this book is all about. Um, Help me understand a little bit about what does meaning look like for an operational leader who's thinking about the concrete.
Yeah, so all humans have the same basic needs. And what I found is that in the organizational research, there hasn't been a lot focused, like you're saying, on the concrete. But the basic needs of meaning are the same, right? People want to contribute. They want to use all their skills, maybe not just their hands, and they need to be connected. So, when you're working with people in the offices, those things are a lot more visible, but it doesn't mean they're not needed in a manufacturing and industrial construction type, you know, environment. So, what it might look like on concrete is, giving people a chance to contribute to how their work gets done. And that's always a little bit controversial because we have, for very good reasons, for productive reasons, really segmented work. So it can be done repeatedly. But it doesn't mean that people shouldn't be part of improving that standard work and being able to, contribute to, this is where my tools are placed. This is where I want to cross train at, those sorts of things. And letting them know how important their contributions are. They may or may not know because they're working in a third or fourth tier um, type of situation where their product ultimately ends up, right? So I'm at a press and I'm, putting out 400 heats a day and then I got it to 440. Well, that's great, 10% productivity. Um, but who cares, right? Like, is that the only thing that's important? It's not, because where those are used are places that make the world a better place. They may not see it. So it's really important that you connect them. You connect them to each other, not just their machines, but what their output is and where it goes and how it makes the world a better place. And the world might just be the next operation, right? And just getting to understand that, wow, how I produce my parts at what rate impacts the people right down the hall.
Hmm.
And that's important.
I have a whole bunch of questions that just spring to mind as you say that, not least of which is, in your experience having, run these massive plants and having observed many kind of managers of people within a kind of concrete context, how many of them are
Mhm.
thinking those things? How many of them actually have answers to those questions in your experience?
Uh, well, when lean manufacturing came along in the 80s, there was this whole concept. It's based on the Toyota manufacturing system that we support the operator. And so it was introduced at that time, but it was adopted, I would say, in somewhat of a blotchy manner. Not all companies adopted it, and many abandoned it when things got difficult, recessions, pandemic, those kinds of things. So I would say most people are familiar with respect for the operator, servant leadership, sort of hearing these in a slogan sort of way, but I don't think anybody has really been necessarily taught what that means, what that looks like. How do I make these things actionable in this very high pressure environment where sometimes I'm only as good as the last numbers I produced over the last 8 hours? So, and particularly in manufacturing, and I love this, and yet it's a big challenge, is that many times the leaders in manufacturing, particularly the frontline leaders who represent the company to the people who add value, they were the best individual contributor. They were the best machinist, the best mechanic, the best construction worker. They showed up every day. They were dependable and smart and loyal. And so they get promoted to leadership. But those are not the same skills as what they got promoted for. And so we haven't necessarily invested in them understanding why it's important to give specific and timely feedback, or let them help solve a problem that relates to their job, or looking them in the eye every morning and saying, good morning, how are you? Those brief little high quality connection moments. They just don't know. That hasn't been their experience. So uh, like I say, I think people will have heard of some of these concepts and they know they're good, but not everybody and not everybody understands how to apply them.
Hmm. Let's kind of keep going down that road because I feel
Okay.
like one of the things that you've done so well in your career, at least in Kathy 2.0, is try to figure out what are the key theories of positive psychology or organizational scholarship, and then how do I translate them in ways that are going to be tactical and practical and meaningful at that operational
Mhm.
level. And so what are those like tell me give me some examples. Like what's an academic theory within positive psychology that you've really like latched on to and how do you translate it for these operational leaders?
Yeah, I think, self-determination theory is one of those things. Now, again, I didn't know about it when I was leading, right? I just, um, was very people-oriented. What I loved was, finding out that a lot of the things that I did in leadership were actually backed by science, right? The concept of flow and Csikszentmihalyi?
Chick send me high. Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea that you can match somebody's competence and really consume them, like, body and soul when you're giving them tasks that are at their preferred level of competence, right? That's
Hmm.
kind of stretch, but not what's the one deflating is the
Mhm,
word I'm looking for.
mhm.
So, those concepts are really big. I think you have so much unhappiness in factories where we only utilize people's hands and they have hearts and brains, and we need to engage those. So I really love self-determination theory about autonomy, competence, and relatedness, Ryan and DC, and I love the idea of flow. We really worry about machine material and information flow, but we don't worry so much about people flow. And when you do get into those concepts, it's the game changer. It's the pivot point that makes all the continuous improvement um, really accelerate and sustain itself, and it makes a culture where people really wanna come to work and give of their discretionary effort.
So let's go into people flow, which flow is absolutely one of my favorite positive psychology theories. And certainly all of Csikszentmihalyi's work has deeply inspired me. But like, what does it look like again in the concrete in the world to take a concept like flow and then put that into practice?
Yeah, so what it means is you walk up to somebody who's having some level of friction or a roadblock in being able to do their work productively, and you ask them, "What's the worst part of your job? What do you dislike?" "Well, I hate when these, gears get stuck." "Well, how would you make it better?" "Well, I've wanted to put a PM in place, so that these things are oiled every so often because when it goes past 20,000 cycles, I really have to fight this thing." So, okay. So you get it on the PM cycle and you come back and you make sure it happened, and all of a sudden the person's like, "Oh, they listened to my idea. They implemented my idea. What I think about things really matters." And then, you tell them, "Did you know that that part was used on a, mission to go and take out the world's most notorious terrorist? Did you know that? Did you know that the seal that you're producing, you know, went and into the water pack that went, with the Marines to capture or remove a terrorist threat?" Are you kidding me? Really? You know, I'm making the world a better place with these rubber parts that I'm molding at a certain rate every day. Yeah, and you making them right is really appreciated. It's that simple. It's really that simple. And so when people realize that what they do matters and that you care about their opinion and you're going to act on it if you can. You can't always. I don't want this to sound like rainbows and unicorns and there's unlimited funds to do kinds of things. It does get them in a state of flow. And my favorite examples of flow are when I discover people who really have ambitions and skills that were never cultivated in them. And then I'm like, hey, why don't you lead the tour next week? You know? And people are like, well, no, that's what the plant manager does. No, you know the work, you know how this goes. And just watching them come to life, and tell about what's meaningful about their work to them and, you know, be able to contribute to the customer and winning new business. And you just see how their eyes light up and they're all of a sudden approaching, their equipment and their job with a new sense of purpose.
It's beautiful. One of the things that it just makes me think of is, well, you kind of named it a little bit before, but I guess the attention of giving someone this kind of autonomy. And then also the reality that you can't do it all the time. That's
Mhm.
that I would imagine in many of the contexts in which you had to operate, there has to be a lot of regimented behavior and process, and you can't make all sorts of changes that people might want to make. So, how do you navigate that tension?
Yeah. Well, it's not easy and it depends on what the situation is, but it's kind of like, your steering wheel in the car, right? You could use it to go all kinds of places, but for the sake of the others on the road and yourself, you need to stay within a couple lanes. So we do use standard work a lot because the best quality of products comes from standardized processes. Um, but there is some room within standardized processes to move things around, to contribute new ideas and that sort of thing. So, it could just be how you present the work to them.
Hmm.
Right? Like, why is me doing this way so important? Well, if you don't do it that way, it causes this defect or it causes that guy down the road, not to be able to use his part or do his work well. So, I'm reminded of that study about the janitor in the hospital, right? Who had all this work to do, but he saw himself as a patient care specialist, not as a person who mopped the floor. And so, I'm sure there were standard cleaning processes that he had to do, but he could also talk with the patients, make them comfortable. So, when people are given the due and the respect that your brain matters too, they're going to be more willing to bring forth ideas that can make things better. And sometimes they cost a lot, and you just have to be honest and communicate with them. We don't have the budget for that right now. We're spending our money over here because this has a bigger impact on customers, or this was a safety issue, and we want all of your teammates to go home safely. I think just having conversations and letting them know that you care and what the limitations are and why these things are important goes a long, long way.
Hmm.
Nobody wants to just be a pair of hands and do what they're told.
It's
Nobody wants that.
It is amazing how it is the simple things like communication, just explaining why something is happening that are things that don't cost any money. They rarely even cost any more time to be able to
Right.
do, and they're so massively important for letting someone know that you care about them. Like that demonstration of care is just so incredibly important from a leadership perspective.
It really is. It really is. And I have a chapter in the book where I talk about compassion. And I think it's such an important leadership characteristic that people know that when things get bad, you're not going to abandon them.
Mm,
Um, but people often mistake that for lowering your standards, and those two are not mutually exclusive.
mm,
If you want to run a really good operation, you have to have compassion for your people and what they face, both in work and outside of work, right? Because as much as we'd like to say we're two different people, we're not.
mhm.
But you have to uphold the standards because you don't help somebody if you let them, um, really not take care of what they need to take care of, right? You enable things that aren't going to be good for them. And I've got so many examples of that through the years where, someone wasn't showing up for work and the supervisor just looked the other way because they weren't comfortable with difficult conversations. And, this one supervisor, she was really an amazing person and the people loved her, but she just did not want to confront people about those sorts of things because, the typical thing is to go to discipline. There's 10-step process, all those sorts of things. But this one, I was really working with her on it, and she eventually confronted this gentleman and said, the next time my hands are tied, you're going to lose your job. I can't, um, I won't be able to save you. You've just accumulated too many points. And at that point, he came clean about his struggle with alcohol addiction. And so she got him assistance. He went and turned his life around and ended up, you know, being one of the best employees that we had and thanking her for saving his life. So that's just one example of compassion and high standards, you know, um, where we were able to save an employee and not have to train a new employee, the turnover and the constant fight of discipline versus, what do we need to get done? And so many examples through the years where that's just so important. It's so important. And um, it's so often missed, so often missed.
Um, Talking about setting a high standard or a high bar, one of the things that you talk a lot about throughout the book is the importance of feedback and recognition. What do
Hmm.
you think that operational leaders often get wrong when it comes to the ways that they think about recognition and feedback?
Yeah. So there's a lot of pressure. Right? There's a lot of pressure, constant time pressure, a lot of fatigue. It never lets up. If you have a good month, then, the bar gets raised and your productivity goals go up. So these are really hard jobs leading in industrial settings. So I think that it sometimes comes out in those emotional outbursts, right? Where constructive feedback looks more like a screaming match because people they're just not resilient, right? They're tired, they're under time pressure, they're under pressure from their leadership team. And so it can look kind of ugly sometimes, right? Where people are literally yelled at. And so that's where we get it wrong. You know, it's okay to let a team know, that they're missing the mark, so long as you do it in a way that you won't regret later, right? You don't want to be hijacked by your emotions. It's so that's oftentimes what it looks like, or yelling at people or giving constructive feedback in front of others. That's where we get it wrong. Um, and also where we get it wrong sometimes is just giving, "Hey, great job," these generic mantras, "Hey, you're doing great out there," instead of saying, "Hey, you know what? When you worked 3 minutes into your break to get that last heat out, that made all the difference yesterday, and I want you to know I see you.
Hmm.
That didn't get unnoticed what you did there, and it was important for all of us, so I really wanna thank you." And that kind of thing you can do publicly, and you should do it publicly unless people are just very, averse to that. Some people don't like the spotlight, but you can still highlight it in your team meetings, right? "Yesterday, we made our goal, and that was because of the contribution of 3 people who went above and beyond." So, yeah, I think, uh reacting in ways that we aren't proud of later is one way we get it wrong. And, doing it publicly, uh, and also, like I said, giving feedback and recognition that's generic in nature
Hmm.
and just feels like a platitude.
As you say it, it just brings me back to the fact that, like, God, if you just care about them, like, care about the human being that's in front of you, Don't yell at them.
Yeah.
Like, don't humiliate them. Try to see
Don't
them.
stand them up on a yellow line
Yeah,
and
that's right, yeah. Like, try to
berate
see
them in front of
them,
all their
try to
employees.
celebrate them, try to honor them, like, make them recognize, make them know that, like, when they've actually done something, like, it's it is simple, and it's also so complicated.
I know. It and even as I speak about it, it just sounds like common sense, but it's not it doesn't manifest itself that way
Mm,
in some of these environments. It just doesn't, and I think it's about all those, factors of just constant pressure,
hmm,
It never lets up. Many of these operations, go 24/7. And when you experience turnover because you haven't created the right culture, people get tired. They
mm,
get worn out, and it becomes a bit of a death spiral. Your performance goes down and then the pressure increases, and it just is this downward spiral where you could just use some of these techniques so easy, high quality connections, right? Go out there, speak to everybody, call them by name, look them in the eye, let them know who you are. And you're going to create those positive spirals of energy if it's authentic.
mhm,
And you're not just following a checklist.
mhm.
It's like, first, greet your employees today. Okay. Joe, did you know what I mean? But the science behind it, that's what I love so much about MAP was just there's so much science behind it and the results are incredible. So the only thing I can really think about is that people in those situations, they don't really have time, to go out and read the latest research. And that's where I come in, right? I love that stuff. So I translate it from, um, you know, these formal theories into, hey, this is what it looks like. If you're a
Hmm.
senior leader, you need to walk the floor once a day. You need to be visible. You need to be present. They don't need to know, the statistical significance of it. They
Mhm.
just need to know that when you're present and you're available and you're supportive, things are going to get a lot better for your operation.
One of the things that I really appreciate about this book is, and you in general, and maybe it's not surprising given the fact that you come from an operations world, is
Mhm.
you don't just think about the individual leadership behavior. You also think about the system that surrounds it. You think about things like
Mhm.
job design. You think about
Yeah.
the way that work is actually structured. So, are there some things that you would say specifically when it comes to meaning that you think are really important in terms of the way that operational jobs are designed?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Um, People with good intentions get even lost in broken systems, right? So some of the things that we miss and really need to focus on are those aspects of connection, right? When I make this thing, where does it go? If I just make this bin of parts and it's taken off to the warehouse, big deal, right? But when I know that it's going to the guy I eat lunch with and either making his life better or worse, right? That's an important thing. Having visibility, understanding why your contribution matters. I also think one of the things that is that the system gets wrong is what I call revolving metrics or metrics of the month, right? Like to really run a good sustainable business that could be there for our children and our grandchildren requires an overall look at a business system. You can optimize any metric, right? So if you're like, okay, this month inventory is the most important. Next month, productivity is the most important. The next month, delivery is the most important. And oh, by the way, you guys know, like, be safe, right? When you have these revolving metrics, people don't know what's important. And that happens a lot.
Mm.
Again, sometimes in publicly traded companies, especially because every quarter you got to come up with the numbers. So that last week of the quarter, is always a little bit crazy. And we do that to ourselves, right? By having to report out these numbers versus saying, hey, this is the system that we use and we're in this for the long haul. And yes, we had a bad March, but we have what's in place to have a good April, May, and June. So let's not play, with the systems. I know that year-end inventory was always a big thing, and, um, uh, you know, at some of my plants, people were just so used to just draining all the inventory through the system because of, how it looked on the books. But then you spent the first quarter putting everything back in place and fighting it. And I'm telling you, people just have these habits. I put in a system, right, where we're like, no, we're going to operate on customer demand and, within these bandwidths. And we had this whole system in place. And in January, I'm like, what happened to delivery? They're like, "Oh, well, we bled out all the buffers." I'm like, "We put a system in place not to do that." Yeah, but Kathy, that's how we've done it for the last 30 years. You know what I mean? So, being very clear about, no, this is the system that supports us for the long haul and not the short-term things, I think is, really important. Um, there's also systemic issues around how gets done in the norms. Are we sitting as leaders in a conference room trying to solve problems when we should be out on the floor working with people and not doing continuous improvement to them? Do it with them, not to them. So that's also, a systemic thing is how work gets done and what you reward and how you handle when things go wrong. And trust me, things are always going to go wrong. One of my favorite things of the day on the way to work was, okay, I have this very full agenda. Will I be able to get halfway through the day without scrapping it? Or will it already be ruined by the time I get there for something that happened on, third shift? You gotta have, you know, you gotta have a way of being able to cope with things that happen and not blame others. Pull them in. Let's have optimism. We've been through this before. We will get through this as well, and really promote that dignity of those who are really trying their best for you.
Hmm. One of the things that I'm struck by as I listen to you articulate some of those things is how much pushing against a system you have to do. If you're going to be this kind of a leader, if you're going to be a leader who focuses on the long term when everyone is shouting at you for short term, when you're going to be
Mhm.
somebody who's going
Yeah.
to say, hey, don't do it the way that you've already done it for 30 years, try it this way instead. And you have all of that anxiety when you just, have the drowning of things that happen to you by the third shift and you're like, god, how am I going to stay on to this? Jenny, you require you need some chutzpah, some bravery, whatever it is, to just to push back. How did you find it within yourself as a leader to stay courageous in that way?
Yeah. I it was something I definitely developed, Andrew. It didn't at the very beginning, there was an awful lot of pressure on me. I was working at a company that was getting ready to go into Chapter 11, so you can imagine the amount of stress and pressure. Operations is always the first place people look because it's very visible, it's very measurable, and, you know, I was threatened to be fired in front of my whole operation
Huh.
at times. So, I didn't necessarily have that, when I was younger and, didn't really understand the longer term implications, right? It was just like that huge fear of failure. But, um, I had some really great mentors and allies who started to work with me, and teach me about not reacting to these short-term things that came up. And as I transformed, that plant within that system, I started to gain the confidence that this was a better way. I mean, not only were people happier, my turnover was down, every single one of my metrics went up, and I consistently did that. They started to back off on me because I was getting the results, and I had proven to myself that these systems worked better. These way of treating people worked better. And even though some of the pressure was taken off because our results were so great, there were still some of the same personalities in place. And as a leader, I always felt like I could not control what was above me, but I could control what was within my purview, my area of responsibility. So I served as a buffer for my teams and not an amplifier.
Hmm.
And uh, when I saw what that did for people in results, it made me be able to weather some of those storms as time went by because I just kept proving it to myself over and over and over again.
Hmm. That's beautiful. It makes me think about how some of the theory around meaningful work says that we find meaning in so many different ways, and one element of the way in which we find meaning is through kinship. Kinship,
Mm.
service, our brothers and sisters on the floor, and in some ways, it sounds like that's what allowed you to continue to persevere, to push past. I mean, let's, call it spade a spade. Your first book is Stilettos and Steel Heels. Is that the right name?
Steel toes and stilettos?
Steel toes and stilettos. Like, yeah, being a woman in this context must have also just been incredibly hard, and probably continues to be in many ways.
Yeah, I think that, I didn't really focus on that so much unless others focused on me, and then, as I got higher and higher, people would just say these things to me like, "Oh, I've never met a VP of ops that's a woman before," or whatever, and so they sort of put this shadow over it that
Mm.
not only was I responsible for all of the plants globally for XYZ company, but I also had to be the savior of all women, in the company. Like, if I
No
didn't
pressure.
make it,
Yeah.
I was gonna ruin it for everybody. So there was some pressure in that. Um, I tried not to focus on it. If people did, I would just slough it off and be like, "Yeah, but you know how great it is to get to go to the bathroom and not have to wait in line like I do when I go to concerts," you know? And those sorts of things. But I did have some incredible allies around me, some incredible, friends. There's a story I tell about, I moved fairly quickly in operations, and I was pretty young when I became a manufacturing superintendent. Of course, the only female in the room, which I always was, right, the youngest and only female in the operational rooms. And it was the first time I got yelled at by the plant manager as a superintendent, and I remember just being totally, like, mortified. My peers were complaining about, the manufacturing engineers being moved and how we couldn't do anything, and I thought, "Well, this is my way to get some street creds with everybody," is I'm like, "Yeah, Joe, we're not gonna be able to maintain these levels," and I did no sooner finished my sentence, and he pounded on the table and was like, "Well, now you've crossed the line, expletive, expletive." And I was like, "Oh my good," like, I was like, I was used to being like the, people pleaser, high achiever, that sort of thing. And I remember I just went back to my, office, hid my head in shame and just, really tried to take in what had happened. And about an hour later, one of my colleagues who was in the room knocked on the door. He's like, "Hey, kiddo." I'm like, "Hey, Pat." He's like, "I thought I'd just check on you because, I'm thinking you've probably never been yelled at before." And I'm like, "I haven't." I'm like, I don't even know how to react. He goes, "Well," he said, "I just wanted to come check on you and let you know that well, it was a painful experience for you. It really helped you with your peers because we just didn't know how to treat you, and now you're just a low life like the rest of us, and so, you know, you're in the club." And I can't tell you how much that meant to me. So that whole kinship, that whole camaraderie, it's almost like, I was never in the military, but I have to imagine it feels a little bit like going into battle every day in some of those types of situations. What was even funnier about it was 2 weeks later, I got the courage to bring it up to my boss, and he didn't even remember it happened. He's like, "I'm not mad at you, Kathy." He's like, what are you talking about? He goes, oh, you just happened to be the last one to speak. I was just tired of it. And here I'd been like devastated, you know, forever. But also like there was such this powerful, testimony about kinship with your friends too. And I was doing a plant tour for some, dignitaries. And I always had the people doing the work tell the stories, but I just walked, guided people and answered other questions. And there's this one gentleman who was seemingly always disgruntled, but he was the one who, did all the machining operation, which I think was really very repetitive, and I think it would be difficult for me to get up every day, to do that type of work. And he didn't do this during the dry run, but when we had the customers there, he said to them, um, he said, my job is really meaningful to me. And I kind of perked up because I was like, this was not in the rehearsal. What is coming? What's going to happen now? He said, but I'm in the reserves. And these engines brought me home from a mission to my family. And I was not scared because all these people here, I have complete faith in and knew that they had done a great job to bring me home to my children. I mean, I was like, it doesn't get better than that. So sometimes people don't even articulate it, but they do find meaning in
Mhm.
ways that they may not want to share with us. And you just got to love that. I mean, again, you're like, what do you find meaningful? I was like, okay, I'm done for the day. I don't need any more meaning. That did it. That was awesome, you know? And so, really, when you get those glimpses, capitalizing on them, you know,
Mhm.
and sharing stories and having them share stories, it's not hard to create positive energy. It's not if you try. I never found it was, but
I guess that's the point. I mean, I feel like your superpower, Kathy, is the capacity to see those moments. They might be everywhere, but so rarely
mm,
do we actually pay attention. And you pay attention, and you not only pay attention, you connect it to the research, to the theory, you elevate it, you shine a spotlight on it, you use it as a way to be able to help others. And so I'm incredibly grateful that you're sharing that wisdom with our listeners. Thank you, Kathy.
oh, thank you so much for letting me share the story. It's been an incredible ride, and I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunities I've had, the ones that didn't kill me but made me stronger. And I'm so passionate about creating these workplace cultures where people can provide for their families. And manufacturing is one of those places, right, where you can have decent work and great benefits and make dreams come true for your children or the people that you care about. So we have to protect those. And the way to protect those is to create great cultures where people thrive and then those business results follow.
Hmm. If folks want to know more about the book, and also about you, where can they go?
Oh, LinkedIn, Kathy Miller. There's a million of them, but I'm Kathy Miller, MAP MBA ACC. Moreforleaders.com. Andrew, you'd be so proud of me. I had an AI agent made of the book, so you can have Coach Kathy in your pocket
Fantastic.
with you by
Good.
going to moreforleaders.com, and I'll send you all those links that you can put with the show notes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kathy. It's truly been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in Writers Workshop on Friday.
Can't wait.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Meaningful Work Matters. If you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And if this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us make this podcast better and reach more listeners. You can connect with me, Andrew Soren, on LinkedIn, or visit www.eubd.ca to learn more about Eudaimonic by Design. Finally, if what you heard today spoke to you, tell your colleagues and people in your community about our podcast. We really appreciate your support in making meaningful work matter. See you next time.